You are listening to Missed Apex Formula E. We are charged up and ready to go.
Welcome back to the Missed Apex Formula E podcast. I'm your host, Chris Stevens. We are 3 weeks into the break between Diriyah and Sao Paulo, so we're almost halfway there, guys. Well done. As promised, we have stuck around to keep you entertained during this little break before we see more electrifying action. When we relaunched the Formula E show at the start of the season, we did so with the ambition of bringing you insights from people of the paddock. And there is no better place to start with that than my guest today, which is Season 3 champion Lucas di Grassi. Lucas, welcome to the show.
Morning, Chris. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for the invitation.
Cool. So, obviously we've had a bit of an extended break since the cancellation of Hyderabad. So how have you been filling your days?
Yeah, actually it was a bit unfortunately that the 2 races that we got canceled, they were like back to back. So it created this gap from Saudi to Brazil of 6 weeks, which nobody really likes it because, as you know, you're getting the rhythm, you're jumping in the championship, getting everything ready, and then suddenly you have a break of 6 weeks. That it's very limited in what you can do. I've been the week after Saudi, I was a few days on the simulator. We're having meetings twice a week, but there is a limit you can discuss. There's a limit you can improve. So, of course, everybody want to be in the car. I've been training. I've been keeping fit. I've been trying to study the data from the first 2 races to try to understand how to improve and how to get better, especially for the next race, which for me is very important, which is the Sao Paulo race.
Yeah, of course, home race for you, and I'm sure we will talk about Sao Paulo in a little bit. Obviously, when you've got a big gap like this, and then you've got a lot of races coming up in quite rapid succession. Every 2 weeks, we've got Sao Paulo, then Tokyo, and Misano as well. So are you doing preparation for those races as well during this break?
Yeah, I did a pre-season fitness preparation. I think one of the best I've done in a long time. So I was pretty comfortable in the first few races. I was ready. But of course, if you stay 6 months without racing, without jumping in the car, even if you drive different cars, Formula E is very specific. It takes a little bit to get back to the full rhythm. Not for me, for everybody. And yeah, I've been just trying to keep it up and try to keep the motivation high and to try to keep everybody, all the engineers, everybody trying to do the work that we can to try to find performance whenever using the time in the best way we can.
So you mentioned you've been putting a lot of effort into the physical preparation. Is that because Gen 3 Formula E has become a more physically demanding experience as a driver compared to Gen 2, for example?
It is because of the front powertrain. The front is actually very heavy. It is probably together with, let's say, the old Formula 2, the old GP2 that I drove, the hardest thing to drive in terms of physical ability, in terms of strength on the arms that you need to turn the car. But on the other hand, the car produces relatively low G-forces. So for the neck and for the core, it's not so bad. And the races are 50 minutes, which also it's somewhere easier to handle. And we didn't have so far any hot races, which actually increases the physical fatigue. But the problem is not only that. The problem is, for example, you have Brazil, and 2 weeks later you have Tokyo. And we do Brazil on Saturday. On Sunday I fly back. I go home. I live in Europe, so I go to Monaco. I stay 2 days. I go to the team. Then I have 3 days on the sim. Then I go back to Monaco for 1 day. Then you fly back to Tokyo. You fly to Tokyo, 12 hours jet lag from Brazil to Japan. You need to be ready. You can't get sick. You can't get tired. You need to be sharp. So, of course, being very fit helps a lot with not only the racing itself, but everything in between, and also to be completely 100% sharp for those races, for the next races, for this back-to-back events, which people don't realize, but for F1 drivers or us, or having back-to-back races over and over again, kind of depletes your energy level. You know, every weekend you have so much media activity, you have so much stress. It's not only the physical ability of driving the car, you have the mental. You have to have the mental toughness. You have to have the immunological system ready and there to not get sick, to not lose a session or lose a race. So the fitness overall works in all these areas.
So it's interesting you mentioned that about making sure that you don't get sick and you're not tired and you're always kind of ready to go, even for not jumping in the car. It seems like in Formula One now, it's becoming more of a thing where we see this driver's been excused from media duties because they're unwell. And maybe that's related to the rapid expansion of the calendar. Is that something you would agree with?
For sure. It's more stressful. The more races, the more events, the more media events, the more sponsors. Formula One has grown so much since the Netflix effect that they have a lot of things happening. But it's part of the job. I don't agree that the season is too big or, all these complaints. I think people have their choice of not being there. I think there is a queue of 1 million people wanted that job anyway. So it is hard, but it is a hard job. It is a high-paid job. There is a lot of risks. But if you're there, you chose to be there, and you have to deal with the consequences. And therefore, you have to be fit. You have to be healthy as much as you can. You have to stay, even if you have a break, even if you are in holidays. You need always to think about, how to not stress your body or how to get better for the next event.
Yeah, always got to have that switched on mentality, I suppose. Let's talk about Formula E then. Is the reason you're here. We know you've been involved in Formula E since well before the first race in Beijing 2014. You were the first driver to sign up and the first person to drive the car. So we know the story a little bit of Alejandro Agag writing the backbone of what Formula E was going to be on the napkin, having dinner with Jean Todt in Paris one night. So when did you get involved? At what stage, and who made the first contact? Did you approach them? Did they approach you?
Yeah, I was. It was July 2012. So the first race was September 2014, and so my story with Alejandro started in Formula 2. I drove for Alejandro. Alejandro is a good friend of Flavio Briatore. Back then, Flavio was my manager, and Alejandro bought this GP2 team from Campos. And in the middle of the 2008 season, they put me in the car, and we won the championship as a team, and I finished third with missing 6 races for Alejandro and Alberto, actually. Okay. Alberto was the team principal back then, and Alejandro was the team owner. And both Alberto and Alejandro, they didn't understand much about racing. They understand a lot about business, but not about race. So it was a good experience to jump in. My teammate was Vitaly Petrov at that year, and so we had a very good relationship. Then we became partners in a GP3 team in 2010 when I was in F1. And then I left F1. I was 2012, 2011, I was doing tire testing for F1. 2011 was a mixed year. I was trying to find actually a manufacturer drive, a top-end drive, because I was not racing. And it was the year I joined Audi with the LMP1 project. But at the same time, in July, Alejandro called me. We sold the GP3 team, and Alejandro was looking. He sold his Formula 2 team. He sold the GP3 team, and he was looking to find something else in the motorsport world. And he came up with the idea of he mentioned Todd and so on. He came up with the idea and got the confirmation from FIA to do Formula E. And he called me and said, "Lucas, look, I just talked to FIA. We got the tender to organize this electric racing series. And what do you think? Would you like to help us? And I said, Alejandro, yes, I think it's very interesting. It makes sense because the electrification is something that will only increase. Back then, we were already driving hybrids in Formula One, in WEC was just starting the hybrids. So it was kind of clear in my mind that the next progression of hybrids was hybrids getting bigger and bigger, like it's happening now with F1 and so on, until the point that you have a fully electric powertrain. And we were way ahead of its time, of our time. But I was like, yes, let's do it. What do you have? And Alejandro said, I have Alberto. And that's it. Alejandro didn't have the money, didn't have the car, didn't have anything, no drivers, no sponsors, nothing. It was Alberto, Alejandro with the idea, Alberto and myself. And then soon after, we Alejandro got the money, the idea of the car was with the battery was, how long do we do the race? We do the race for 20 minutes. And then Alejandro said, no, we do the race with 2 cars. And then everybody thought he was crazy. And even I thought he was crazy. I said, but because the problem was, initially the amount of power we could extract from the battery was so low that I said, Alejandro, it's not feasible. No good driver will drive a car that reaches 150 kph or 200. It needs to be at least 250 kph. It needs to be a certain level. It needs to have this difficulty. And the only way to do it was actually to have 2 cars for the length that was required and for the minimum performance requirements that we needed. And so I was advising Alejandro actually I never tested the car. I couldn't because the car was not ready. The car, so 2012, from July 2012 to end of 2013, was mainly building the company up. So hiring people, deciding on suppliers, looking for sponsors, looking for teams. I introduced Audi Abt back then because I was already with Audi. I introduced Virgin Racing because of my past relationship with the Virgin F1 team, and so I was helping to build up the business. And by the time, so in March 2014, when the team's already getting the drivers, I decided to, and the car was just about to be delivered, the first real test car, because the cars that you see that I was driving in Vegas and in some other events, it had a prototype battery that only delivered 80 horsepower. Was just really for was just for the show. Was nothing. I couldn't even I could not even do donuts. Actually, there is a meme. There are so many stories, but actually there is a meme of the car going in circles with doing donuts very poorly. And it was because I had no power. The car had the prototype battery didn't have the torque to do donuts at that stage. So, and then when in March 2014, I signed with Abt to race, and then I stepped down from the series as an employee, as a partner there. And in about April, May, the real tests started, and then there were many other drivers testing tires and testing everything. So, and then I joined Abt, and then the first test, I think it was August, the first testing done it on the first days. It was amazing because nobody really knew what was going on. There was no, like, sometimes teams looking backwards, doing very stupid stuff. And the first race was Beijing 2014 in October. And then I won the race with that accident in the last lap. So, and then the story started as racing for Formula E. And I did Formula E and WEC together for 2013, 14, 15, 16. And then Audi pulled out of WEC. And then I decided to full focus on Formula E. I won the 2017 championship, and and then Audi decided to leave, and then I changed to Venturi, and then so that's the story.
Yeah. John, I do want to get into your time in the LMP1. A lot of people still call it WEC's golden era, so to speak, but just sticking with, kind of the origins of Formula E for a little bit. I mean, you have a genuine passion for technology and green solutions. You're not just involved in Formula E, you've been involved in the development of self-driving cars, and the e-scooter championship as well, and lots of other things. And so I just wonder, where does that passion for technology and green solutions, where does that stem from?
So the passion is for technology. It's not for green solutions. Green solutions, They come because we are ready with the technology to be implemented, that novelty in society, to make it cheaper and better and fairer. And there's a lot of benefits of this new technology. If the new technology would have been, nuclear engines, I would be pro-nuclear powertrains. It's not that I have this activism for greener solutions where they don't make sense. I only think, for example, I don't want to, let's say, push for intercontinental electric flights, because it's impossible. We cannot do an electric plane that flies from London to Sao Paulo. So it's only practical solutions. So my passion for technology, or for engineering in general, it comes since I was a kid. My favorite toy was Lego. My father is an engineer. My brother is an engineer. I used to tune my own go-kart engines when I was like 13, 14.
Wow.
I used to take my carburetor home and then polish. Not the whole thing, but I would take the carburetor home, disassemble it, polish all the parts, make sure that they are shiny and was the best there was, to improve the flow, and try to come up with different solutions to for my stuff. So it was always with me, and I always like to study about it. So I was reading fluid dynamics books by myself just to try to understand a little bit better. I was even if I didn't do university, I started an economics degree. I did 1 year, and then I had to drop out to move to England to race in Formula 3. But I always loved this progress of civilization. And the older I get, the kind of more nerd I get on these topics. And now I have my kids and stuff. So there is a progression there. So I think this helps a lot. First, it helps a lot with my career, because I think there was a lot of more talented drivers than I was. But I went further on my career because I think I worked harder and I understood better the car. So my advantages were that I worked really hard, and I understood, and I tried to communicate to my engineers in the best way possible. And this gave me an advantage. And I saw that as an opportunity, because if the driver is very talented, normally he's very lazy. And I with my talent, and plus my engineering and my hardworking skills, I always thought I could beat the most talented driver there was. So that part of me becoming a professional driver helped a lot for me to achieve what I needed to achieve, and also to kind of understand where the motorsport world was going to be, try to be a little bit ahead of the game.
Yeah. We often have the debate on the podcast about sort of raw talent versus the effort that a driver puts in. So I think maybe Lewis Hamilton versus Nico Rosberg was maybe a prime example. I think it's a more sort of generally accepted idea that Lewis Hamilton is one of the most naturally gifted drivers of all time, but the amount of effort that Nico was able to put in to get onto his level made for some really great battles. Not that Lewis wasn't putting in, the effort, but you could see Nico was working harder. I guess Michael Schumacher is another example as well of just somebody who was constantly with the team, pouring through data, last one to leave the track, that kind of thing. So it's nice to hear that that does actually make quite a huge difference, and you're not just relying on I'm an amazing driver, so therefore I don't need to put any effort in with the team.
Yes, but that happens in every sport, and even in companies, or even in, I don't know, even in a podcast. I don't know, you might not be the most talented podcaster out there, but if you put the right
Definitely not.
No, but if you put the right effort, you create, you work very hard, you put a lot of effort, you make sure all the details are in place, that you analyze your audience, that you analyze who's listening to you, which question to ask in advance, your product will be better than a natural talented guy that is very disorganized. So this actually, or for, I don't know, playing basketball, the guy that wakes up early, goes there, throws 100 balls before the session starts, stays late, that pays off. So in racing, it's not different. A lot of professional sports in general, and professional and even companies, is how hungry you are, how much are you willing to put an effort and to grind hard and to look at details and to understand where you need to get better and how to do it. And of course, there's a lot of people that were born with some gift or a bit lucky that they just kind of things fell for them. But I didn't want a pre-born gift or luck dictate my future, right? So I think everybody can do that. Of course, there is limitation. If I decided to be I don't know, a marathon runner, I could train as much as I could, and my body type just does not fit an Olympic level marathon runner. I will never reach a top level. So there is limits you can actually do, but within those limits, the amount you can stretch by putting hardcore effort into it is, I think, is surpasses talent in a big way.
Okay. So I do want to get really nerdy with you about Formula E in just a sec. Before I do, I'm very curious to know, we've been talking about the origins of Formula E and where it is now. What would you say is the biggest difference in Formula E from Beijing 2014 to where we are now?
To start with, I think that everybody's much more prepared. Everybody knows much more about the championship. Beijing was kind of, you had to come up very quickly with solutions with problems that you didn't know existed. Now we know the problems, let's say. I think that's a good, fair point. We know the issues, so we can prepare better. In Beijing, we didn't know what we didn't know. So you had to come up quicker with the solutions on site, with less preparation. And the level of drivers has always been very, very high. We had Sato, Trulli, in Beijing, we had Sato and Trulli in the grid. You cannot have drivers with more experience than them. Montagny and, Buemi and everybody, myself and Bird and everybody was there. So the level of drivers were as good as always. Maybe there were like 3 or 4 drivers that were not on pace back then, that now there is none. All the drivers are top level. But overall, maybe the top 10 drivers, they were same level. The top 15 drivers were same level. Teams, again, more prepared, more understanding, more refined. And then the car itself changed. The racing back then, you had less, the cars were slower in terms of power, but they were much more raw. They were much more, let's say, I'll give you a perfect example of the brake system. Now the computer decides the brake system according to the regen you have and the mechanical brakes that you need, and distributes normally. So you just have to start and race and brake and all good. Back then, the regen was adding on top of the brake bias. So every lap, you had a little bit more regen on the rear axle at the start of the race, but your bias was fixed. So the brake was moving rearwards every lap. So you had manually to actually move the brake balance forward every corner to not have rear locking, because the regen was building up. As the battery SOC went down, you can put more regen on the rear axle. So you start with 0, and after maybe 5 laps is 150 kilowatts. Used to be. Now it's 250, but now the computer automatically distributed it as it goes. Back then you had to manually change. So if you didn't, the car would massively oversteer. So many stuff. It's a very different sport, much more detail, much more competitive, but with much more preparation and much more help.
That actually brings me on very nicely to my next topic. I do want to get super nerdy about driving in Formula E, because I think there are so many elements that people don't really consider and maybe are made a big enough deal of in Formula E, for example. So, I mean, just comparing to, say, some of the higher downforce cars that you've driven in Formula One or in WEC, I imagine that when you're approaching a corner, for example, you can't slam on the brakes quite as hard as you would do in a higher downforce car, because Formula E by design doesn't have a lot of grip and aero.
Yes, that's 100% right. The driving technique, especially, so the driving technique of any racing vehicle is very, very defined by the tire characteristics more than the car.
Okay.
So the tire characteristics actually dictates a lot. And then, of course, aero, power, and so on. But if you change tires, and you can see that in F1, when you change tires from a year to another, sometimes a driver which was driving very well, they lose maybe a step in performance. The other drivers adapt better. So tires are very critical. And we have a very, very stiff and hard tire from Hankook. That does not help that the car has much more power now, with 350 kilowatts average on the rear axle. And we have much more torque than we can apply now. So a braking technique, for example, you're perfectly right. You have some downforce with Formula E, so you need to apply more pressure at high speeds, but it's not like Formula One or LMP1 that you have to have a full spike, because the way the tire works, if you have a spike, the tires lose grip quicker than the systems can react. So you need to have more of a GT style of braking. And I'm, for example, personally, for me, it's very hard because I've been racing high downforce cars my whole career. Even if I've been driving Formula E, these tires specifically, you need to detune a bit your brain to how aggressive you can be. You have to be, the smoother you are, the more you have the control of the car. If you're very aggressive, you lose performance. It's very easy to overdrive a Formula E car and lose performance. And that's why you see, for example, in the last race, Jake Dennis winning the first race by 13 seconds and second race qualifying 16th and finishing, I think, 10th or 11th, I don't know, something in the back. And I was going to say, how can a driver in the same track, same weekend, win a race by 13 seconds and then be in the back? And I mean, you overdrive, you change a little bit, you push a little bit too much in qualifying, or you change a little bit, and you're already not competitive anymore. And sometimes don't even know why. So it is the most sensitive to driving inputs car I ever driven. Much more than Formula One, much more than Formula 2. Every small one more bar of pressure in the brake, another 2 or 3% of throttle. If you slide a little bit and you overheat the surface of the tire, you can destroy your lap, and that lap can destroy your weekend. So very, very, you need to be very precise and very, and do not overdrive the car.
It seems to me, just from the outside looking in, like a car that you need to think on your feet a lot of the time and react to how the car is sliding, because we see them sliding a lot, again, because you talk about the characteristics, not a lot of grip, not a lot of aero. So are you having to think on your feet quite a bit, or is it a bit more sort of predetermined?
Yes, in terms of driving technique, it's almost driving in the wet with a Formula One car or with a wet car. Because of the amount of torque and the low grip with the tire and the low grip with the tracks, most of the times you can only go full throttle in the middle of the straight. Because if you go full throttle before, you just have wheel spin, you're just like losing a lot of traction. So you're always like, another 5%, less 5%, you're always pressing a little bit the brake or the throttle and trying to balance the car with those in a very fine way. And every small input changes a lot of output in the car. So sometimes you brake with another 3 bar, which is very minute when you're driving. And the behavior of the car goes from understeer to oversteer. And then you're like, how this is possible? And then you go back to the garage and the engineer says, how is the car? Is understeer or oversteer? And you say, one lap it was understeer, and the second lap it was oversteer. So I have no idea what to do. So the car is very sensitive and requires a finesse of driving in the dry in the same level as you would expect from the wet racing in other series.
Okay. So a wet Formula E race is like your worst nightmare then?
Yeah, it is. In London, last year we had a wet race.
Yeah.
During the whole lap, you would reach full throttle for like 3 seconds or 4 seconds. Because you couldn't, there was not enough traction. So the whole straight, you were like, trying to put more throttle and the car would move the whole straight. And when the car stopped moving, it was already time to brake. So it was like, you're like on the edge with the walls near to you, like zero mistake possible. And you could see all the drivers like going sideways like crazy. Like you would be everybody moving. It was extremely hard.
Yeah, well, that's where you really earn your money, I suppose. Are you guys still doing the manual regen as well? Is that paddle on the steering wheel still as well?
We have a pedal, but the pedal lost a little bit of sense because we have now front regen. The pedal in generation 1 and 2 was a way to maximize your braking for the regen, so to put more energy back in the battery. But by doing so, you lose a little bit of brake efficiency because up to Gen 2, you didn't have a front deacceleration unit, MGU at the front. You didn't have any deacceleration at the front to be able to cope with that. So you'd brake only with the rear axle. But in many races, it was more efficient to brake only with the rear axle than to brake with the 4 wheels, just to get more energy back into the battery. And now, because you have the front powertrain and the rear powertrain, you have 600 kilowatts of possible regen. That's almost enough that you don't need to touch the mechanical brakes the whole race. The problems we have is that the front powertrain in hot races, you use so much on the braking that it overheats. And when it overheats, it loses the capacity to do the regen. And then your bias shifts rearwards if you're only using regen, or you start using mechanical brakes, which means you start wasting energy. Some teams, they use it, some teams, they don't use it. And it's more a tool to have a quick reaction in something that you need. And each team has a different way of setting up the pedal.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you brought up the teams, because you mentioned as well, you give your feedback to the team as well. And it's like one lap it's doing this, another lap it's doing that. So I imagine it's hard for them to try and find a direction to take the car in. And maybe that's why we see disparity between the teams sometimes, right?
Yes, and you don't have time to adapt. You have a session of half an hour that the
Yeah.
track is improving. Like in Riyadh, the track improved 7 seconds during the session. So how the car started and how the track ended, I mean, it's already a completely different car and in a completely different track. Then you have to do the changes for the second session, which also very quickly changes the how characteristics of the track, which changes the characteristics of the car. And then that's it. You have half an hour, and then you have qualifying, which is a few laps on. So also you don't have enough, or you don't have so much time as, let's say, F1, to have hours and analyze this data, and being on a track that you've been many, many years, and the track is relatively the same, like Silverstone has been relatively the same for the past 10 years. So you know already where that bump is, the right height. With Formula E, especially with the roads changing, because the road from one year to another, they change. I don't know, they do a new patch, or there is more dirt because there is a construction site nearby, or so it's much more dynamic. So you always try to adapt the car, but there is a limit what you can do. And sometimes when you start the weekend and the car is nowhere, it's very hard to turn that around and find performance because of the time.
Okay, so where do the teams make the biggest difference then, do you think? Because obviously Formula E, a lot of the parts are spec. Obviously the powertrains are made by the manufacturers. There are a lot of customer teams in Formula E now compared to a few seasons ago. So what is the difference, for example, between top teams in Formula E and the tail enders in Formula E?
Well, first is powertrain quality. The powertrain makes a difference, because it's not only the powertrain, it's the suspension, it's the weight, it's the efficiency, it's the controls, it's the software. So having a good team having a good car helps a lot. I was customer of Mercedes in season 8, and the powertrain was very, very good, and it was an easier job for we finished with Venturi second in the championship. So it helps when you have a good powertrain. And then the team operationally makes a difference as well, because you have so little time. You cannot waste time by, I don't know, having a problem with the brake or the mechanic forgetting to fix a certain screw that you lose half of the session, or you have a reliability problem that was caused because of faulty cable in the car. So, and also the preparation. So a few days before going to the race, you are on the simulator, you come up with the ideas of what you want to do in the weekend. And that also helps a lot for the performance overall. But I would say factor number one is the powertrain and controls. Having a good powertrain and controls is number one. Then the operations of the team, number two.
It's funny, everyone looks at Formula E and say, oh, all the cars are the same. And they're like, oh, well, powertrain, how much difference can that make? I mean, when we're talking about it, it's 4 parts of the powertrain, but clearly we see disparity between the various manufacturers. So does that all come down to finances, basically? Like in most motorsport, it's how much money you can spend determines how well you're going to do?
Yeah, there is a cap. But yes, in the end, it's not only finances, but if finances relate to the quality of the product and that you make the right choice. Also, this is very important. For example, I give you the example of the, let's say, differential. You can test 100 different types of differentials, different lockings, different faces, different ways to control it, and so on. But if you chose, you got the best differential that is made for, let's say, Valencia. It's not the same differential that works well in London.
Right.
So on top of it, not about how much money you spend, but also which one you're going to choose and prioritize for which type of tracks, or which characteristics that you can actually change that differential, that it works in many different tracks. So also the decisions and sometimes there is compromises. For example, an electric motor, normally, the bigger and heavier it is, the more efficient it is, because you can have less losses. But if you have a very, very big motor, you have a lot of inertia, and also the weight in the back of the car. So yeah, it gets worse with handling and weight, but it gets better in efficiency. So if you make it very small, the motor will be better in qualifying, and then worse in the race, but handles better the car. So how big you make the motor, you can again spend hundreds of millions of euros and choose the wrong one. So the choices is not only finances like in F1, it's also about the quality of the choices you make and the compromises you take. And this influences how good the car is. And in Formula E, it's very close, right? From first to last is like half a second. So if you have 2 or 3 tenths there, which is very easy to get, you go from literally P1 to P16, 18. So a good powertrain makes a big difference.
Okay. I'd like to go over some elements of your career, which has been vast and eclectic. And I'd like to go back to the weekend you won the Formula E title. It's a weekend I remember very well because I was there, and we all remember from that weekend probably Formula E's most viral clip of Sebastian Buemi charging up and down pit lane and having a go at a few drivers, including your former teammate Daniel Abt. So I'm curious, when you saw that, and it had been a long fight between the pair of you for several seasons, and you were knocking 7 bells out of each other. When you saw Sebastian doing that, what's going through your mind? Are you thinking, I've got him right where I want him?
Yeah, it was the first years of Formula E was a big fight between me and Buemi. Of course, Buemi is an extremely good driver, and he was in probably the best team in the first few seasons, with Jean-Paul Driot and Alain Prost and the Edams, backed by Renault. And Renault was the first supplier, so Renault provided all the powertrains for the first season. So Renault knew exactly how the car was, and they had the best car in season 2 by far, still the best car in season 3. So it was a very hard fight to win that title. I almost managed to make it in season 2, if it was not for a disqualification in Mexico, or anyway. And I almost got it in season 2. Then in season 3, the pressure was very high. I had a lot of pressure on me. I really wanted to win the title, and I really focused that weekend. Pretty much nobody believed I could win the title when we arrived in Montreal. It was many points to Buemi. They had the best car. They were extremely fast. They won 6 races that year in a row. So it was very unlikely that we pulled that off, but I really believed we could do it. And as the weekend unfolded, and exactly as we just discussed, he did one mistake in free practice that led to the penalty in the first race, and then in the second, and then he tried to move and he crashed with Franz, and then his head was gone, and I managed to win that race in a very hard way, holding up all the customer team of Techeetah with the Renault powertrain. So yeah, I was, in the end, I was so happy over the weekend. I didn't care about how the weekend unfolded. I was so focused on my work. But looking back, it was quite funny to see that viral clip.
I mean, having listened back to your radio at the time as well, it was very clear how much it meant to you. Was that the highlight of your racing career, do you think?
Yes, winning the title in Formula E was a highlight. and was something I really worked hard and I wanted more than anybody else by far to win that title. And yeah, I mean, it changed my career. It changed my for me especially, because I wanted to win a title in Formula E, and it changed me. It changed the way. Almost like every moment that I work hard for these thousands of hours from the past years were worth it. And it's the best. It's the most incredible feeling in the world.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. And we are predominantly a Formula One podcast with this Formula E arm, so I can't let you go without talking a little bit about your time in 2010 with Virgin Racing. So what is that moment like where you're at the first race, your first ever Grand Prix, your whole life has been building up to this moment, but you are doing it with a team that, to put it kindly, was not very well prepared. So what was that first weekend like?
Yeah, the first weekend was chaos. So I got to where I wanted to be as a childhood dream, which was to be in Formula One. But then you go to the first weekend and your fuel tank is not big enough for you to finish the race. So you're ready before starting the race. You know that your fuel tank is not going to last the whole race. You have to do a huge amount of fuel saving. I was without the extra fuel we needed to run, because the fuel tank could not catch all the fuel in the fuel tank. I was already 17 kilos overweight, which in F1 is half a second a lap. So you start already with the car, which is badly. It was designed in a year. It was very raw. The car was not bad, no performance at all. Then you start already, you're overweight. Your fuel tank cannot last the whole race. Every session you had, there were some reliability problems with the car, with this, with that. So you're ready, for the first race, it was a dream come true, so I was very focused, trying to get the best out of this. But after 10 races with the same type of feedback, you start losing the motivation, because you say, look, what does it change that I push so hard, and in the end, but you try to keep, to push that feeling back on the back of your mind and trying to just focus on the performance. And the external world does not know you're overweight. Glock was more experienced, so he had all the priority in the team and so on. So I look back as I learned a lot that year. I matured a lot as a driver, as a person, how to deal with my frustrations, how to find a way to keep my motivations even when everything was against me. And I improved a lot as a driver. So I'm glad that I can put on my CV, I'm an ex-F1 driver and I had my experience. But when I look back, if I had an opportunity in another team, probably everything would be very different as well. So
it's funny you talk about how that adversity helped shape you and made you a better driver. So I do a lot of work in the Euro Formula Open Championship commentating for their series. And a lot of the drivers we end up getting have moved over from Formula Regional. And, they're both F3 level series, but most drivers end up in the Formula Regional. Drivers who have had a very difficult time eye up Euro Formula, and you can see how that adversity has shaped them as well. And then so they arrive in Euro Formula and suddenly they're winning races and they're with different teams. And suddenly things are very different, and you get drivers who suddenly then have opportunities to move up onto the FIA F3 Championship on the F1 support bill, because they've gone through that tough time and it's changed them and they've moved into a different championship. So it's really interesting to hear how what looks like a bad year and was probably very difficult for you as a driver, like say losing that motivation, how that then shapes you as a driver and makes you better for the future.
Yeah, I think the only way to shape a person and for you to improve it's where you reach your boundaries, where in your mind, you go to a stage that you're completely out of your comfort zone. You need to find strengths to go through to understand yourself better as a person, and that it's a lesson for life. It's not only a lesson for a professional athlete, but it really shaped me on a professional basis, where I needed to go and how I became better after that year. And before that as well, moving to the UK, leaving family behind, living by myself, all this, all the hard work, everything gives you the hunger and gives you the motivation and like the willingness to succeed that is harder than anybody else. And that, for me, in the end, is the great differentiation between a professional athlete and a very good, talented one. What's the difference between the top 10 tennis player and a top 100? Is how much they are willing to sacrifice. And the technique is the same. They probably play the same amount of hours, or maybe, but it's the willing to sacrifice and how hungry you are to make that next step.
And probably makes the moments when you do succeed even sweeter, right?
Yes, and you you learn how to deal with pressure. You know how to what's going to affect you, how to calm your mind, how to calm that inner demon that 3 o'clock in the morning is like talking to you. It is a very interesting experience as a person to go through that stage. Of course, when you are going through that, it's very hard, and not thinking this way. On hindsight, it's very easy to look back and say, I did that and that improved me. But as you go, you're going to unknown territory. You don't really, you don't know if you're going to succeed. So it's very stressful, very sleepless nights. Always, for me, it was always like, okay, I do one more year in Europe and I go back to Brazil. I do one more year in Europe, I go back to Brazil. I do, okay. And then it has been like this for 20 years. So it's hard.
Oh, I can only imagine. And very quickly as well, before we get into some quick fire questions, just to round out the show, talk to me about being with Audi and being in the World Endurance Championship in LMP1, going up against Porsche and Toyota. They were some incredible years for the championship.
Yeah, Audi for me was where I made my career, actually. So I cannot be more thankful to that group of people, to the brand. I stayed with them almost 10 years as an official factory driver in the top programs, LMP and then Formula E. And we won the championship as a team in 2018. The constructors titles in Formula E. In LMP, during my time, I finished second, but the team won Le Mans in 2014, and we were second in the World Endurance Championship in 2016. So was where I made my money, where I made my career, because I was stable, I was there, I could deliver, I had a manufacturer behind. Before that, I was always like, you don't make any money in Formula 3, you don't make money in Formula 2. My first year in Formula 1, also nobody in the first year, they make any money in Formula 1. So being in that with the manufacturer, getting that contract for me was a game changer in my life, and I can only be thankful. And that LMP1 car was the golden years of racing, because the car was, 10, 15 seconds faster than the current hypercars. It was, the budget and the technology was equal or better than F1, because you had more freedom to do different stuff. The car was amazing to drive. It was like a beast. It was even if I personally, I don't like endurance racing. I think it's very car dependent. There is a lot of factors. It's not my type of racing, but I had the best time of my life with Audi at Le Mans. I had a great experience. I had a great experience with Tom. My first year as a full factory WEC driver was with Tom Christensen as my teammate. It's like having the Messi of endurance there with you. I was learning so much with him. So, and I had amazing teammates and I'm friends until now. So it was a great time.
I love hearing how Audi sort of shaped your life. And I guess we talk about young drivers, the ultimate goal is to be in Formula One. If they aren't able to do so, is becoming a works driver with a big brand like that kind of the next goal?
Yes, of course. My goal when I started was like, okay, I want to make a living out of racing cars. Of course, the more, if you are number one in F1, is where you make the most money, you become the most famous and so on. But there are other series, even IndyCar, like, with Dixon, with um, in NASCAR, in endurance, like with Tom. You can have many drivers that they became super famous. They made their career in other series, and I think that should be the goal for the racing driver. Of course, you aim for F1, but it's very, very hard to make a living out of racing. There is only a few handful of drivers that you can actually make substantial money, that you can actually only live out of racing cars and create and make that money for an extended period of time, that when you retire you don't need to work anymore. It's even harder. So it is an extremely unrewarding line of work, because you spend a lot of money to get there. The chance of you getting that money back is extremely low. I've seen families losing all their wealth in putting the kid to become a professional driver, and there is no money in it. Is the total amount of money you make. People look at race in general as very glamorous, but there is only, like, I don't know, maybe 30 to 50 drivers in the world that make very, very good money, and then you drop very dramatically quickly. And nowadays, even as a works driver, if you are racing, let's say GTs, or the level of money is not as good as it used to be. So, the goal is in the end to stay together with a factory driver, with a manufacturer, to have a factory drive, and to be stable and to build up your career there. And then you are safer, you're more secure, you don't depend on sponsors, you are depending on your work you put in. And this should be let's say, the primary goal. And then the secondary goal, of course, if everything falls into place and you're good enough, you go to F1 and you win titles, or you go to Formula E and you win titles, or you go to IndyCar and you win titles.
Yeah. So actually, you've just reminded me during that answer. So one more quick one before we go into the quick fire. There's a lot of speculation about what you will do with yourself when you decide to hang up your racing gloves. People say that you could run a championship, you could run a team, you could run the FIA if you really wanted to. So have you put any thought into what a post-racing driver Lucas di Grassi is going to end up doing?
Sometimes I think about my long-term future, and as I always did, how not normally the way I work, like I trace my long-term goal, let's say in 10 years, what I need to be. 10 years ago, it was becoming Formula E champion. So how I win a championship in the next 10 years. And then I work back saying, look, I need to get better here, I need to get better there, I need to get a better team, a better sponsor, and so on. Now, my 10-year goal, I will not be racing anymore, right? So sometimes although I still have my short-term goals, which is I have a few more years racing, and I need to still win races and still possibly fight for championships if I have the right people around me. I already look at the 10-year window and say, look, where I need to go and how do I prepare myself? And it's not clear. My dream would be to stay in Formula E and help the championship to grow. because it's where I know the best. But I don't discard working outside of motorsport, going to do something different. From Brazilian politics to having a startup and focusing on some stuff that I think could be developed, a few products. But I think soon after I stopped driving, I would still be involved in motorsport, either as and I would say my dream would be to stay in Formula E and try to help Formula E to become a better championship. If that is through FIA or through Formula E or through a team, or not clear. And I don't think it will be until I decide to stop.
Okay. Well, we really look forward to seeing what that world is going to look like, because you've offered a lot to the racing world behind the wheel, and we know you're going to be equally contributive outside of the car as well. So we are running short on time, so let's do some very quick fire questions. First one is, what is the best car you've ever driven and the worst car you've ever driven?
The best car was 2016 LMP1 from Audi, the last car. That was the best. And the worst car I've driven, I would say the current Formula E car.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is that purely because of the difficulties with the grip?
Yes. When I say worst, it means the hardest in terms of, not the worst that it's not, let's say, so the worst is that the most unpredictable, the most difficult to get a lap out of it is this year. The Mahindra last year and this year, Cupra, I think this car we have is extremely hard to drive. And the best, the more smooth, and you was the 2016 LMP1.
Okay. I think favorite racing memory. Did we kind of cover that? Is that Montreal winning the title?
Yes, I would say Montreal. Macau also, and my first F1 race also. But I think the title in FE was the most special.
Okay. Who's the best teammate you've ever had?
Whoa, this is a good one. In terms of quality of driver.
Oh, whatever was a good teammate to you.
Yeah.
It could be somebody you could beat easily.
No, let's put it in. I would say the one I learned the most was Tom Christensen, and I joined WEC quite a lot with him. In terms of high-level driver, I would say in terms of how the level of driving currently, I would say Nico Müller this year. It's on a very, very high level.
Does that GT experience come into it? You said the car handles more like a GT, and Nico's done a lot of GT racing.
I think it's much more in that side, yes. So he's, with this Gen 3 car, he has been, since the middle of last season, he has been the driver to beat. And I think if he was in a top team with a good car, he would definitely fight for the championship.
Wow. Okay. Big words. And last question. What is the best advice you've ever received?
To focus on myself and not on others. So to focus on where I need to improve, regardless where I am, instead of trying to focus on to beat somebody or to have a better result somewhere, or try to. So always try to look at yourself and where you can get better. Was probably the best advice.
Lucas, thank you so much for coming and having a chat with us.
Chris.
It has been absolutely wonderful. Your insight has been just fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Much appreciated. And anytime you need anything else, I'll be here. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I will take you up on that 100%. Listeners, don't forget to keep an eye out for more interviews like this. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Check us out on social media at Formula E Pods. Check out myself at Chris on Racing on Instagram, TikTok, and X. This has been Missed Apex Formula E.